I laughed just a moment too soon. I was holding my face. Because I did a real straight line on both of my eyelids today. Do you see that? Do you see that really straight? But it's only real straight when my eyes are like this. That's why I did that. Because as soon as I go like that, like this side of my face has a different shape than this one. So like
Yeah.
it doesn't like unless I go like that, you can't see how straight the line is. Like my eyelid covers most of it unless I'm doing one of these.
A lot of people have those different thing. If you look at um, what's his name, the actor,
Mhm.
the actor, Stars Born.
Oh, Ryan, what's his name? Is it Ryan? Is it? No, it's not Ryan. Is it? Oh
No,
no! Somebody in the chat tell us. Wait, what's his name? No, with the Lady Gaga one, right?
yes,
Okay,
that,
okay.
that
I'm
guy.
I'm such a bad millennial right now.
One of his
Bradley
eyes,
Cooper. Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper. One of his eyes is noticeably lower than his other eye.
But that's part of his like charm, I think. Like
Uh-huh.
that's part of his
Yeah, but you don't
cuteness.
really. Yeah, I mean, you don't. I think unconsciously you see something's off kilter with his face, which makes him interesting looking, but you don't really know what it is. And then
Right.
once you know what it is, it's like you can't stop seeing it. It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a very normal and interesting thing to have sort of an like some kind of asymmetry going on. Like it's very normal. If someone's face is extremely symmetrical, it almost has an uncanny valley effect. Like, are you a real person? Not the same. No, it's fine if your face is symmetrical. I'm not making fun of you. But you know what I mean?
Very, very weird. There's always something off. Um, Even just the way you smile, or
Yeah.
whatever.
There's some kind of asymmetry.
Yeah, we're talking about faces for those of you
Oh,
tuning.
yes. We're talking about how how my eyelids are in different shape.
And you
My
can see
eye
it,
area because I do so much makeup, I've studied this closely on my face.
and everybody has a better side. Like for instance, my best side is this one.
Oh, Chris. Wow.
My best side.
Because I'm always deciding which side to put my hair on. I always put it on the same side, but I forget which side that is each time. And then Chris decides which side he's going to put his beard on. Yes.
Mom and Dad are here. Hello, Mom and
Mom
Dad.
and dad are in the house. Hey, mom
Now
and dad.
we can start. Now we can start because Mom and
Now
Dad.
we can start for real. Mom and dad are here. We got some peeps joining us on YouTube, on Facebook. We never know who's watching live on Twitter. Hey, Twitter. Hey, Twitter people. So happy if you're watching live. Hopefully you are. If you're watching later, hello to you too. um, but I was just telling Chris about this sparkling berry lemonade. We both picked up the drinks at the same time. Sparkling berry lemonade from Trader Joe's that I have, and I'm super excited about it. We had some summery weather this past week, and it was delightful, Chris, wasn't it?
It was delightful. I wasn't even here. I was farther north, and it was hotter
Oh,
than hell up there. It was bizarre.
right. You were up in
I was in Vermont and Montreal and Saratoga Springs, and it was t-shirts, short pants, weather,
sandals, no jackets.
and yeah, in early April, early to mid April, in Canada. For God's sake, they didn't know what was going on.
That's so awesome. Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. Just loving, so you were on like a little college tour for Frankie.
Yes,
Very exciting. Very exciting. So that was super fun. I was, just around here doing my thing, but I got down to the beach. I was out for a few walks and just really enjoying wearing some dresses and sandals, my favorite clothes to wear.
Yep.
And I can't wait. But now that we've tasted it, even if it goes back to being a little bit chilly, we know it's coming. It's like it's different than when you're waiting for that first hot day. It just feels different, I think.
Yep. Hey, it's 8:01, so we should be
It's time for our official welcome to FUMFA reading 125. Woo!
Nice round number, 125. Amazing.
Yeah. Very exciting number. We are pumped to bring to you this evening Benjamin S. Grossberg and Amanda Parrish Morgan, two incredible powerhouse writers. And we're going to enjoy their readings this evening. And you got to stick around for that Q&A at 9. We hope you all had a nice holiday weekend last weekend. If you were celebrating Easter, Passover, just maybe a long weekend, springtime, and Orthodox Easter, which happens to be today, I think. So, hey, we're back. We're back today. We thank everyone who tuned in for our 3-year anniversary show 2 weeks ago. That was so special to us, and doing this show and having all of you here is so special to us. So if you happen to miss that, we hope you'll check it out. But Chris, tell our audience what is coming up before we get into our readings this evening.
Well, coming up on Friday, this coming Friday, which is the 21st, we will be live and in person, returning to our home away from home, Eco Evolution in South Norwalk, for our April open mic night, featuring a cavalcade of fantastic guest performers, including our featured readers and performers, Van Hartman coming back, and then some FUMFA folks. Sharbari Ahmed is coming up. She's been on here before, and she's showed up at these open mics, but this will be her first time reading. She has a new book out,
featuring
and our old friend Jamie Chesborough. Finally getting them out.
Finally, we've been trying since March 2020, people.
3 years we get Jamie coming out to read some of his amazing work. So check that out. That's Friday the 21st, 7 o'clock. Eco Evolution in South Norwalk. Keep your eyes peeled for our social media blasts and information. You can sign up and you can read there yourself if you're
sign up and come down. If you are in the tri-state area within a commutable distance, fly in. We want to see you. Tell your friends. Please. We have such a great time, and it's writers, it's poets, it's musicians, comedians, our parlor trick guy. We have such a great time. Please don't miss out. We hope you'll come to enjoy listening, or to sign up and share a little something, or just to hang out with me and Chris.
That's right. And then in 2 weeks, we'll be back here doing the live stream on the 30th. We got Ann Huang and our can't wait to meet BJ Buckley, who lives out in the boonies of like Montana or something. So she has to go to her library.
We've been planning this for a long time.
In order to be on our show, because she has bupkis for any kind of internet service.
No internet.
How far out she lives in the United States of America. And then up after that, we get our friend KJ Michke, who's got a exciting new book come out. And Sharbari will be back on the live stream. We have Jack Powers, Jessica Quello, and then we're back to the in-person thing in May. And we got a whole ton of cool people all the way into the summer.
A whole ton of cool people. We'll be doing a finalist night for Fairfield Book Prize, and we're hoping to bring back some old friends for some fun group readings during the summer. So please stay tuned. And if you would like to share your work here on the live stream, please reach out to us on social media or email fumfalive@gmail.com. We are really, really excited for everything that we have to come. But without further ado, we need to get into our readings this evening.
Cool.
We are very excited to welcome our first guest of the evening, Benjamin S. Grossberg. Welcome, Benjamin.
Hey, Katie. Hey, Chris.
Hey.
Thank you guys for inviting me to be part of the reading tonight.
Yes, it's our pleasure. We can't wait to hear you read. I will go ahead and introduce you with your bio. Benjamin S. Grossberg was born in Far Rockaway, New York. His latest collection, My Husband Would, won the 2021 Connecticut Book Award, woo, in poetry and was a Forward Indies Book of the Year. His other books include Space Traveler and Sweet Core Orchard, winner of the 2008 Tampa Review Prize and the 2009 Lambda Literary Award for Poetry. His work has appeared widely, including in the Pushcart Prize and Best American Poetry Anthologies. He also co-edited the anthology The Poetry of Capital, which curates poems that address the economic challenges of our moment. Last fall, he was a festival poet at the Dodge Poetry Festival. Ben is Director of Creative Writing at the University of Hartford. Awesome. Benjamin, we are so excited to hear you. Take it away.
Thank you guys again. A pleasure to be reading here. A pleasure to be reading with Amanda. I'm going to read some poems from a just completed manuscript called When You Read a Novel the Dead Would Like. And I guess these poems are more or less meditations on mortality, as it's come to me as I've experienced it. So I'm going to start with a couple of poems about the death of my mother. She passed away in 2017, which is pretty heartbreaking. I think having like being inside somebody's body in that way creates a bond that maybe nothing else does. So so what are you going to do about that but write some poems? So the first poem I'm going to read is called The Wedgwood, the Watches. Wedgwood didn't matter, she says, speaking to me in a dream. The little vases and ashtrays, the boxes littering the house, I ask, they didn't matter? No, she says, swirling ice cubes in a tumbler of vodka. No, though haggling for them at yard sales, watching people watching people wrap them in newspaper, then shoving them so wrapped into my purse, that mattered. She takes a drag on her cigarette like she used to at bingo when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and she sat across from me, smoking cigarette after cigarette, to the drone of numbers in a hall so dense with smoke you couldn't make out blue hairs 5 seats away. What about watches, I ask, knowing my mother's predilection for watches. A Hamilton, she'd cry, a Seiko, it still works. Winding its gear between the long nails of her thumb and forefinger and thrusting it right up against the side of my head so I could hear the tick. Watches, she says now, so ghostly in my dream that she flickers as hazy and insubstantial as cigarette smoke, generating smoke. Didn't mean shit, she says, slicing the air with the edge of her palm like she did when she was alive, her face, her jaw set firm. But showing Dad the watch after I came home from the auction, holding it out and watching for the tick to register in your eyes. That, she says. Then she mentions Dad, how he'd snatch the watch from her hand and hold it up high and say, it ticks, it ticks. She got a real bargain, a real Matsia, a Hamilton that ticks. Then he'd parade around the kitchen a little, do a kind of strut, and she would grab the watch back from his hand and strap it on her wrist and wear it the rest of the day and say, I know, as if there wasn't any irony in his pronouncement. And who knows, maybe there wasn't. And now, because it's a dream, she grabs my wrist and zap, we're in the house where he still lives, watching him bend over a drawer with 9 or 10 Seikos and Hamiltons, with his forefinger stirring them around as if they were morsels of frying meat. He's speaking in a low voice. She liked watches, your mother. So I ask her, if the watches don't matter, but this matters, doesn't that mean the watches matter? She twirls her tumbler of vodka, and we look up from the kitchen counter at my dad, who continues explaining about the watches. But soon, all we hear is the ticking of out of sync gears. Tick, tick, tick. My mother approves. It was not evening out jewelry, not twice a year jewelry. She slept in it. She always said when she died, I would have it, but almost certainly never pictured me wearing it. How it would lie an inch below my beard in the hollow between my clavicles. How the serpentine chain would catch stray hairs on my shoulders and neck. And the emerald, bright with its corona of diamond chips, would fill the open collar of a flannel shirt over jeans, brown belt, work boots, and be, to the right kind of man, a signal, a traffic light glowing green at the most vulnerable spot on my throat. Now in death, she understands the necklace was always about drawing the eye to the flesh, a way to scoop light from the air, to make a man want to catch that light like a snowflake on his tongue. Yes, that's the word she's saying to the body most like her own once was, briefly incarnating herself in front of me to straighten the chain. Yes, it fits like that, close to the throat. So, part of my consideration of mortality also has to do with my history as a gay man coming out in the late '80s, living through some of the worst years of the United States AIDS epidemic. And the next poem I'm going to read is about that. It's about my experience as a young man learning about or apprehending AIDS. This poem uses a somewhat sexual word, and it uses that word a lot. So if you're the kind of person who finds that fun, right on. I think I am. If you're not, this is kind of a warning. Okay. Trespasses. AIDS was a car wash sponge, full and dripping, that could wash the features off my face. That's why I was so afraid, not of dying. Who can conceive at that age of dying? It was those 4 letters, script written in chain succession, becoming my signature. It was an identity waiting to replace my identity. Was the self's friable edges crumbling off in palmfuls? Was the wallpaper of myself curling away in strips, the dried glue a powder bursting around them? And what then were the walls underneath? The walls were Dick. The walls were Dick and Dick and Dick, and now everyone would see. Their eyes like arrows pointing at a naked anatomy, as in the shower, curtain pulled back, an inrush of cold that startled hands can't hold off. AIDS was an admission whispered from one child to another in a dark bedroom, after which neither, for different reasons, can sleep, was an after hours pounding on the door, a hauling away from my brothers, their eyes narrowing as I am handcuffed out, except the cops and the cuffs were Dick. The lashing and dragging, the eyes hissing at my commerce with the same kind of flesh they have between their own legs, but used only in the sanctioned places. It wasn't fear that I would die. What did I know of dying? Wasn't fear of sickness, of pills, of the young I saw aged by it. Wasn't fear of age, but of blankness, that the first fact of my identity would become to me too an absenting of identity. Too late, all these years later, to blame those who taught it to me. Too late to do much but own it. That to say I had AIDS would have been to hand over a map of how I used my body, an unfolded state with highlighted routes, roads which everyone around me had condemned. And by roads, yes, I mean Dick. Dick and Dick and Dick. The question always, from all sides, did you? Implicit everywhere, in everything, did you? How else do you think I might have said, I got this disease? I am infected with Dick. How else? I have taken its antigens into my body, splattered across myself this flame paint of judgment, this damnable truth of Dick and Dick and Dick. So just in case you were counting, that poem does use the word dick 13 times. Okay. All right. I'm going to read some poems now from a kind of a short series. This is called Selections from a PrEP Diary. If you don't know, PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis, and it's a pill that if you take it, will keep you from getting HIV, which to me, perhaps to many of my generation, is a miraculous thing. It's inconceivable to me almost, and yet it works. So it's very strange to have something which was a lifetime of fear suddenly vacated. Selections from a PrEP diary, day 0 after AIDS. So they tell me, and it feels all but true that with a pill, a necklace of fears could slide from me as if of its own weight, the clasp released. PrEP or undetectable and nothing. The body's fluids, those beaker poured distillates, held to a light, swirled there and half admired for their killing power, suddenly clear. And it seems a thing to be declared by a religious leader rather than a scientist, pure as water. Once, I'd have been glad to die of anything else, rather than say here in this poem that I had AIDS. But perhaps only receiving that diagnosis could have freed me, flung off with a dog-like shake this, no, not necklace, but a shock collar, one sparked by every improvident touch, its chrome circlet cracking as it strikes concrete. A man in his late 20s or early 30s or late 30s, can the generations divide so finely along a seam of trauma? A man smiles up at me with an ease that ratchets tight each intervening year. It's okay, his eyes say, widening in a way my own never will. Terrified for both of us, I lean in for the kiss. Day 4. This pill lets you breathe underwater. And sailors used to take it before setting out in their rickety ships. This pill stops black lung, Teflons the sacks, so soot, coal dust, tar, everything exhales cleanly out. It's fun, the black puffing after can be blown into rings or a steady curling stream. This pill proofs against cancer. Would to God my mother had remembered to take hers. It pulls the cancer cells to it where the chemical pools in the nails, lets you clip cancer from the edges of your fingers, little deadly yellowed moons in the sink basin. You run the tap and down they go, down, down. It's a wonder of this humanity that we constitute, how quickly the new becomes the what's always been. What a few cases of this stuff could have averted, carefully deployed. Was it all with the right compound so easily headed off? Has history always been so damn preventable? Day 35. I want to be that guy. The one who has sex everywhere, who bubbles with it. The friend you lose at the supermarket, then find at the head of the frozen food aisle near the loading dock and the bathroom, and now his shirt's untucked. He's flushed. He opens one of the glass doors of the ice cream case to cool his reddened face. When you approach, he puts his hand on your shoulder and winks and, I'll tell you later, wink. I'm the guy pushing the cart. I don't want to leave the cart because it takes so long to pick out the best produce. Because I don't want just any box of pasta. I want an undented box. And if the cart's out of sight, how will I know if anyone's banged it? Is it such a terrible word, slut? I want to be the guy who enjoys being a slut and says the word with a smack of his lips. He knows it means he hasn't been fussing over groceries, knows that even bruised fruit tastes pretty good, and that no one, their mouth stuffed with penne, frets about the dents. Day 75. It kept always being Sunday. Before my mother died, and after. I thought of Paul before Jimmy died, and after. The narratives of hope grew irksome. I'm almost 50, my body well on its way to ruin. What are a few chemicals, more or less? Pandora kneeling at the box, having let loose all the pharmaceuticals. The experiment that each generation is. The experiment that each generation is loosed on the generations before it. In this new America, we don't really get old until just before we're dead. How can I write about prep without writing about love? Go back to Romeo and Juliet, go back to the Greeks. No one can write about love without writing about dying. No way but this, etc. An outboard motor on my ship of death. At what age does ambition become something younger people praise you for? Before my mother died, her concerns fell away, importance redefining itself in tighter and tighter circles around her body. Just a few weeks before her death, she felt well enough to get a haircut. She wanted a haircut. All the conventional wisdom told us to find meaning in the moment. All the advertising told us we could buy it. Biologically, we just wanted to sleep in piles with other mammals. There was a fire, Somewhere far off, a howling from which we felt insufficiently insulated. When a stone sounded 3 times against the cave wall, when smoke from way back smelled of a pleasant roasting, we came forward, salivating. I told a man I loved him only a month after we'd stopped speaking, and only by email. But, I note in my defense, I used to touch him online at the supermarket, my hand against his shoulder. The problem of too little may be a problem of too much, too quickly, like a crowd trying to get through a door without first forming a line. The last time I remember eating meat, a Sunday. I am at a barbecue with my brother and his friends. I am 22. I have just come out. It comes off the grill in strips, more sauce than meat, and I put it in my mouth. The tang of tomato sauce and vinegar. Does everyone here know I am gay yet? We are all enjoying the meat. And one more poem from the series, Sometime Later. This poem uses a 4-letter word, maybe twice. Okay. Sometime later. For men, the first real date is in bed. Maybe I shouldn't admit that, but it's true. My point is that prep makes me a better date. It's like having your mom's visa and pretending to suaveness as you silently slide it across to the waiter. It's like winking, but not nearly as cheesy. It's like holding a car door, except hotter, like texting later that night to say thanks for the evening, or even better, doing it from the bathroom while brushing your teeth as he's waiting for you in bed. A good date ends with a shared shower. A good date begins and ends with food. A good date has got to involve relaxing, being yourself, and how to manage that unless you fuck at the start of it. On the couch before dinner, the cat jumped on my lap, so we both began to pet it, and there went dinner. I want to say that dating with prep is like dating before AIDS, but before AIDS, was there dating? The 70s, that magical oppressed era that seems now to linger only in disco ball reflections and a particular color palette, a time simultaneously decadent and impossibly naive. Did men date then? I'm 7, 8, 9 years old, a decade from awareness, sitting with my family in front of the color set and squirming, I don't know why, as Norman Fell from Three's Company tilts his wrist, purses his lips, and bats his eyelashes for the laugh track. From that to AIDS, to the Matrix, or something like the Matrix. Take the pill, Neo. Wake yourself up. And I'm going to close with a poem which is the last poem in this book, this meditation on mortality. And this poem is called At 50. At 50. Then I came to a juncture in my life in which I was like a child taking a train to the city for the first time. Back before the advent of cell phones and laptops, when even light-up watches were a novelty. So that, though it had been bright morning, even through the train's darkened windows, there is nothing now, not even aisle lights, when the train enters the tunnel, connecting the city's mainland, connecting the city to the mainland. and everything becomes quiet. Not that the noise of the train's wheels against the rails, the constant whirring has ceased. If anything, it seems louder, but quiet of human sounds, as if everyone understands that here, in this stretch of the journey, it is better not to speak. The tunnel, long as tunnels go, is lined with tile, once white, now matte gray with exhaust. And the child sees behind each the force of water, imagines a tile popping out and green river rushing in, then other squares around it also popping out. But he knows too, because his father has told him that the tunnel is not just under the river, but under the rock under the river. And this is almost worse, that if the train broke down, he would be stuck there, already buried. So he too stays quiet, trying not to add the slightest disturbance to the air. And maybe everyone else has made the same calculation. He can still see the sides of their arms in the seats ahead of them, all the way up the aisle, but it is like they are not there. Soon he will burst. His father also told him this, into a hive of motion. He has been made to memorize which escalators to take, which turns, where to sit to wait for his brother, a weaving through densely peopled corridors where he must not stop or talk to anyone. But that feels very far off. The train yet to rear up, to breach the water surface like a great whale and spit him out on the hard sand of another country. For now, it seems he will travel below rock forever, stuck in his seat, growing old there, and that to speak even a single word will bring it all down on him. Thank you.
Benjamin! Oh my God! Chris, what a powerful, powerful, powerful reading. Benjamin, just incredibly tender, human, powerful poems. It was so, so beautiful to hear about your mother, to see your family, to hear these incredibly powerful and tragic poems about AIDS. But then also these super fun poems about like having an awesome sex life. And I love it. And then this last poem with this very stressful imagery where I'm like feeling it. I'm like, oh, I'm in the tunnel.
Yeah.
Just great stuff.
I was going under the river, you know, on the train for sure. And
Yep.
you know, I was write down little notes, and I wrote down, you know, from the first poem, the tick tick tick, I wrote down, and then like 2 poems later, I wrote dick dick dick.
There's a thread.
There's a rhyming thread here.
And so beautifully read as well, Benjamin. Just a really, really gorgeous reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Yes. Well,
we'll see you in a few minutes for the Q&A. Everybody, please give us some questions. I know you have some.
I know you got questions for Benjamin, everybody. All right, Benjamin, we will see you soon in the Q&A.
Thank you guys again.
Thank you. Awesome. Wow. What a way to kick off the evening. Benjamin Grossberg with just a beautifully powerful reading. But we have our second reader of the evening, and we are super excited to welcome Amanda Parrish Morgan. Amanda was recently an in-person feature at Ecoevolution. Y'all got to get down Ecoevolution. She gave a fantastic reading, and we can't wait to hear what she's going to share with us this evening. Chris, would you do the honor of sharing Amanda's bio?
But first, yes, the bio. Amanda Parrish Morgan is the author of Stroller from Bloomsbury. It came out last year, which the New Yorker named one of the best books of 2022. Noting that, quote, the central strength of the book is not comprehensiveness, but the way the stroller and Morgan's experience of her own strollering years become an omnidirectional magnet, pulling disparate material into friendly proximity.
So cool.
Uh,
That was like an epic quote by
Ian
itself
Neilson,
right there. That was awesome.
Some of Amanda's writing has appeared in many, many places. I'll name a few: The Rumpus, LitHub, Guernica, The Millions, N+1, and all kinds of fantastic and cool and hip places. Amanda lives in Connecticut with her husband and 2
Connecticut.
kids, where she teaches at Warehouse Fairfield University.
Woo!
As Westport Writers Workshop, which is where I know her from. And take it away, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. Benjamin, thanks for going first to it. I haven't done a live reading in quite a while, even though I feel like, at the 2020 time period, there were a lot of them, and I felt a bit out of practice with it. So it really helped to not have to go first. I appreciate that you did. I just wanted to, I can ask about some of these things about Benjamin's work in the questions, but I'm going to be thinking about that contradiction of the 70s a lot. I've been reading another memoir that gets into that a bit. And so it's something that's just been on my mind, and I'd love to ask about once we get to the Q&A. I'm going to read from an essay that I've been working on that's about actually Connecticut. I grew up in Connecticut and sort of spent most of my early years telling everyone who would listen that I hated this place and would never, ever live here again. And then found myself moving back here when I was around 25. And so I've been sort of, for a long time, interested in thinking about home and what home means and what it means to leave a place and return, and sort of how that contradicts with the idea of the narrative we love as a culture about the heroic thing to do is to leave someplace. And what does it mean if you do your best to heroically leave and then here you are again? So this essay is called Return. And yes, so I'll just, without saying anything else, I'll go ahead and get started. Okay. On an early spring day, my son Simon and I were on our way home from his preschool when we turned down a usually quiet street, growling with the sound of an excavator tearing down a house. I'd never paid much attention to the house that had been there, but I could see from what remained, the front ripped off, most of the floor between the first and second stories gone, that had been a house where a family with children had lived. The house was neither particularly big nor small, neither fancy nor rundown. I asked Simon if he wanted to stop and watch. He just turned 2 and was fascinated with construction vehicles that I often sought them out on our stroller runs. He looked at me wide-eyed, and while he said yes, he'd like to stay and watch, he reached for my hand and held tight the whole time. He looked back and forth from me to the house. We'd watch backhoes rip apart flood-damaged roads near our home, steamrollers smooth the grade after the town put in new gas lines, heard jackhammers drumming loudly all summer long as our neighbors put in a swimming pool, and he'd taken it in with exuberant interest. Now he was somber. We watched for so long that I sat on the cold ground, still holding his hand, the sharp crabgrass leaving marks on the back of my bare legs. When we finally went home, I sensed that he knew we'd been brought closer together by the solemnity of what we'd seen. The summer after I graduated from college, I took a job working as a canvasser for the DNC. My job was to go door to door soliciting contributions for Democratic candidates in general, but particularly for the upcoming 2004 presidential election. The job was mostly terrible, exhausting, stressful, a constant violation of strangers' privacy, but it was there I met my first boyfriend. At the end of that summer, Andrew and I moved to West Virginia to work as field organizers for the Kerry campaign for 3 rural counties in the middle of the state. We drove from Chicago to my parents' house in Connecticut for a short stay, and then continued on to his parents' house in Pennsylvania, and eventually onto our training in Charleston. The night before we left, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, I had a dream that instead of going on to our jobs, we'd moved into my parents' house and that it caught fire, somehow because of us, burning to the ground. Long before a Carl Jung obsession, I'd had a dream interpretation obsession, carrying a thick hardcover dream dictionary with me to summer camp in middle school and eventually to college, dutifully recording my dreams each morning. I'd known a house was a symbol for family since I was an adolescent. I didn't need theories of archetypes and collective unconscious to understand the dream's warning. I didn't tell anyone about the dream, and Andrew and I dated for 4 more years, me always simultaneously knowing that to marry him would be a mistake and hoping that he'd ask me to marry him. He was not a bad person, and while it wasn't a bad relationship, it was not a right relationship either, at least in part because we did not want the same things. I wouldn't have told anyone then, but I wanted to be a mother. More specifically, I wanted to have the life I'd sometimes glimpsed through the windows of the houses I visited on my canvassing job. Parents helping kids with homework, muddy baseball cleats, the smell of homemade Sunday night dinner wafting to the front door where I stood giving my pitch, an ordinary, maybe even boring domestic life. Toward the end of our relationship, I daydreamed both privately and with Andrew about the two of us moving to an apartment in Inwood on Manhattan's far north end. Andrew was perpetually going to apply to grad school at Columbia, and from Inwood, I imagined he could get to campus and I could get to the Metro North station at 125th Street, where I could grade papers on my way to and from a teaching job in Connecticut. I told myself that the 70-minute commute each way would be of no consequence since I'd use it for work I'd otherwise have been bringing home. I was so committed to this plan that I learned the names of big apartment complexes nearest the subway and which Connecticut schools were within walking distance of the commuter rail station. I broke up with Andrew over the phone. After all those years together, all those months of talk about which neighborhoods would make a commute to Connecticut possible, or had I just imagined those conversations? Maybe so much more of the future planning had been implicit and one-sided than I'd let myself acknowledge. My question about visiting a specific apartment and my follow-up confirmation turned accusation about his commitment to living together was met with silence. In that long, quiet moment, I realized also that Andrew would always be going to apply to Columbia and that I'd always be waiting for a person I knew I shouldn't marry to propose to me. I said, I think we should break up, and we both cried for a long time. When we broke up, I felt hollow and stunned. I hadn't forgotten the fire dream, but I'd ignored it for years, the years we dated, even though I'd known on some level that we shouldn't. I'd still been proceeding as though we would get married, have children, start a life together that ultimately led to baseball cleats in the front hall. But really, while I'd been living with my parents and applying for jobs, imagining teaching high school English as some vague first step in this plan, Andrew was living in New York, harboring visions of a future I'd never have access to, either in its ideal state or in reality. The rest of that spring, I went to my job coaching track at my old high school and fought back tears while trying to have conversations about relay handoffs. One sunny afternoon, my eyes red and dry, the other coach asked me how I was doing and told me about the hard years of his own marriage. I spent a lot of evenings back then watching The Sopranos and eating thematically chosen Italian takeout with my dad. My mom and I went on long walks around the neighborhood, and I went to all my little brother's high school baseball games. I went on interviews for teaching jobs in the suburbs near where I'd grown up. Through all this real sadness, though, was quiet relief. I had known the fire dream's meaning in the same instant I woke up. The winter they were 5 and 3, I took Simon and Thea to the Cloisters, the Metropolitan Museum of Art's medieval collection. It's a museum that looks like a castle perched by itself on a wooded hill in Inwood. School was closed and Nick was swamped with freelance programming work he'd taken on, so it was just the three of us, bundled up against unseasonable cold and hoping for an easy drive to and from the city. For all that dreaming about Inwood, the only time I'd actually spent there was at the Cloisters. Andrew and I had gone to hear a medieval choral performance one Easter weekend and to see the unicorn tapestries, whose meticulous restoration process fascinated me. I first heard about the unicorn tapestries in 2005 when the New Yorker published an article about their restoration. In 1998, the room that housed the tapestries underwent a renovation and they were removed for cleaning. In order to clean them, though, the linen backing had to be removed, and Catherine Colburn and her teams of experts in tapestry restoration saw that, as well preserved as the colors on the front of the tapestries were, the colors on the back, where the weavers had meticulously knotted and tied each string, were even more vivid. Colburn speculated that no living person had seen the colors since they'd been hanging in place since 1937, and the museum's director hired a team of consultants and photographers to painstakingly document the colors in high-resolution photographs. When Andrew and I visited, we walked around the grounds and I took pictures, with a camera, not a phone, of new buds on trees backed by Gothic architecture. I conjured images of what our Sundays might be, mornings spent doing the crossword puzzle and afternoons ambling through the park to hear more choral performances, evenings sipping wine and cooking hearty dinners. Never mind that we had never done any of these things, these hallmarks of what I dreamed romantic life before children might be. I imagined running through the park after a day of teaching, up the steep hill to the museum, and then back to my apartment, where I'd grade stacks of essays at the kitchen table in our one-bedroom apartment with a parquet floor, a term I'd learned from looking at Inwood apartment listings. But instead of moving to Inwood, I moved to a small apartment in Norwalk, Connecticut. It was carpeted and on the first floor of a Victorian house at the end of a one-way street leading to a harbor. It was 10 minutes from my parents' house, but was within walking distance of the train. In a practical sense, this made me feel more connected to Manhattan or New Haven, where most of my friends were living. But even more than that, it was a way to hold on to that other life I'd been planning. Some kind of insistence on my sophistication despite my return to suburbia. When I moved in, my favorite high school English teacher, who by then I'd started to feel comfortable calling Calvin, gave me a kitten that was born behind his gardening shed. And when I got my first teaching job later that summer, we split a bottle of champagne and he helped me write my first lesson plans in that living room. When I moved back to Connecticut, it felt temporary and then embarrassing. I'd always thought of myself as someone who left, like the protagonist in the novel I'd been trying and failing to write for years. Partly this was because leaving seemed like the most obvious mark of change and growth, evidence of progress, a journey outward in Joseph Campbell terms. And on a more superficial level, for all the longing I had for an ordinary domestic routine, I also imagined myself to be the kind of intellectual, artistic person who couldn't abide the suburbs. It had been easy to blame Connecticut for the feelings of loneliness I had as a teenager, to see myself as too weird for the state famous for upright commuters. In those first years when I returned, I did feel again like I was in the wrong place. There weren't a lot of single people, not enough people who seemed lonely or intense or weird like I was. I was too obsessed with my job, with running, with books, too close to a life I'd wanted, but just later, under different circumstances. Married with kids when I was a little older, after I'd lived in New York with a parquet floor. I thought that somewhere else, Nova Scotia or Inwood or Tangier, there would be more ways to be. Some of the most intimate moments I've shared with Thea and Simon have been moments where their innocence and wonder touched up against darkness. Part of the reason I picked the cloisters for our adventure was Thea's love of unicorns. But the unicorns Thea loved, the ones with rainbow manes that decorate her backpack, the ones she draws in kindergarten art class, are very different from the bearded, persecuted, and ultimately caged unicorns of the medieval tapestries. The night we got home, I tucked Thea into bed and for some reason picked up one of her many unicorn stuffed animals and said stupidly, "We saw you in the museum today." Thea gasped and pulled Uni away from me. In a horrified whisper, she scolded me. "Don't tell her that. She was trapped." I've thought about what that ripped open house Simon and I solemnly watched has in common with the unicorn tapestries, not just the darkness inherent, unspoken, but still plain to see, but also in what each reveals about how a story, a piece of art, a home, a life is made. The usually hidden work, some of it messy or knotted, is laid bare, but also something truer, messier, but more vibrant is revealed. One way to interpret the house on fire dream with more nuance might be to see the destruction of one's childhood home or nuclear family as a prerequisite for growing up and maturing emotionally and even sexually into an adult who will someday have her own family. If the specifics of my relationship with Andrew had been different, that might have been more plausible. But in this case, I knew that the dream was a warning. To commit to that relationship would be to threaten the foundation of who I was and where I'd come from. I didn't have any dreams of destruction when Nick and I moved in together, or when 8 months pregnant with Thea, we moved into the house we live in now. When I started my canvassing job, our training involved alerting us to clues, not just political lawn signs and ACLU bumper stickers, but Tibetan prayer flags on the porch, PBS playing on the television, a Prius parked in the driveway. The process of building a reductive narrative about strangers was the only thing I thought I did well at my job. I thought I even had a pretty good sense, based on paneling and window treatments, how positively the person at the door was likely to respond to my pitch. When Simon and I stopped to watch the house, most of these clues had been wiped away. Although I'd stopped because I was superficially matched the excavator on the street with the cartoon version in my first books of trucks and diggers, but we'd stayed, awed, because he understood what else was happening there. The bright pink bedroom wall and peeling posters didn't signal teenage daughter to him, but he understood something of the loss occurring as the house went down. The pink walls brought back the memory of my own childhood bedroom, the photographs I hung on my also pink wall, the times I stayed up all night reading, cried myself to sleep, said something unkind, stared with wild self-loathing at my stomach in the mirror, avoided something uncomfortable, dreamed of the house on fire around me. For Simon, I think it was more abstract and more concrete. A house was built there, and now it was being torn down. I've thought about what that ripped open house Simon and I solemnly watched has in common with the back of the unicorn tapestries, the usually hidden work, some of it messy. Oh, sorry. Okay. Every few weeks in the summertime, a canvasser rings our doorbell. Back in the summer of 2004, my coworkers and I, mostly all just out of college, ended many nights with oaths, not to no one in particular, that we'd always answer the door, never display no soliciting signs, that even if we couldn't or didn't want to give much, we'd donate a few dollars. We'd all had nights when we didn't make quota, and having a lot of small donations could help soften the end of night cash out. I'd stayed true to the promise, and while there are a few causes or candidates I wouldn't be able to bring myself to support, none of those has ever come canvassing. Last summer, a woman just out of college stood on our front porch, her hair dripping from a fleeting afternoon downpour. She was collecting money and signatures to ban microbeads, which truthfully is low on my list of passions. I'm sure the day had not been perfect. I'd likely gotten frustrated with Simon's unwillingness to wear shoes, been made less present by some personal obsession. I had probably been sipping a glass of wine and cooking dinner. Perhaps Simon and Thea were arguing over the magnet tiles. I couldn't help herself, though. I told her I'd had a similar job years earlier, though of course John Kerry is as meaningful a part of her political landscape as Michael Dukakis is of mine. I wondered how she felt about her job. It was hard to imagine anyone liking it. And what, if anything, she thought about me, my kids, my house, the life she imagined it contained. Standing on those Chicago porches with my DNC clipboard tucked under my arm, I felt both homesick for something in the past and wistful for something I hoped would come when I stood on those strangers' porches. I clung stubbornly to the idea that a journey should be linear. In the diagram I used to give my students when we studied mythology, though, the hero's journey was depicted as a circle, a call to leave the unknown world, a journey through challenges and obstacles, culminating in an abyss, and then finally atonement and a return with a gift. As I've thought about what it means to forgive myself for any of my real and perceived failures, I've also thought about notions just on the other side of forgiveness, atonement and compassion. To atone involves some degree of penance, whereas compassion involves more simply understanding either oneself or another. There really were some things I needed to forgive myself for, the mistakes I've made as a friend, even the kind of cruelty with which I viewed myself. But some of what I'd been so ashamed of, my body, the extent to which I'd internalized a narrative about what it means to be a mother, the times I was afraid to look straight at a problem and confront it, required simply compassion. Atonement, though, feels like it is only achievable through love, the act of loving itself, the closest I can come to undoing, making up for, setting right, all the large and small ways I wish I could have been or might yet be better. In many ways, having children and the world altering love it has entailed, no matter when or where, would have been a kind of return. It would have required a turn inward, would have meant occasions to revisit the books I'd loved and re remember moments of magic or heartbreak that I'd forgotten. It would have meant thinking about my own parents in a new way, even if I wasn't doing it in proximity to the places that were formative in my own childhood. But in taking my children to the same pediatrician's office where I was once referred to a nutritionist, to play this at the same beach where I orchestrated my first kiss, passing my students, some now parents themselves, having adult relationships with some of the people who loomed so large in my childhood, has kept those places and those people from becoming mythologized. It's meant being able to see the map of my adulthood overlaid on the map of my childhood, my own parenting mapped onto my parents' parenting. I hope I could have found this in an apartment in Inwood or alone in Nova Scotia, but doing so in the shadows of my own childhood and in communion with the people, literature, and landscape that have been central to the woman I've become, had made this return feel simultaneously like a relief and a beginning. It feels surprisingly right to be here, even though here is a place I once considered a regression within the larger, more adventurous vision I had for my life as a young person. Returning to the landscape of my childhood has allowed me to reconcile with my past as a means of self-transformation. Returning has asked me to recall all of the ways that I have been delighted and lonely and ashamed and broken and in love here. That I have nursed babies and bought formula here, sent children out of the little world in our house and off to school here. Sometimes I still feel too intense, too weird, too messy for this place to call it home, but I became a teacher and a mother and a writer here. Thanks.
Amanda! Oh my God. This is the night of tears in the eyes, Chris. Amanda, your reading was just so powerful and poignant and just gorgeous. And I can relate in so many ways, even though I'm not a mom. this finding that feeling of home and kind of being surprised by it. This idea, that beautiful image of the map of my adulthood overlaid on the map of my childhood, and what you said, like it feels surprisingly right to be here. It's so poignant and so beautiful, and just like so, like you said, surprisingly right. What a beautiful, beautiful feeling. We have such, in this short space of time, you've given us this whole picture of what it means to find your home, find your place, and kind of find who you are. It was just incredible.
Beautiful. And the effortless, seemingly seamless skipping around in time. I just started noticing, it's like, you as a mom with your kids, and then back with Andrew, and then back with the kids, and then back, to West Virginia. And then, it was all very smooth and seamless and beautiful.
It was totally fluid and seamless. We're following you through these different ages, and we're just seeing it like a movie. Really, really gorgeous.
Kind of, yeah. And but smoother than a movie. It's like a movie.
Yeah.
It's always, it's always sort of jarring. It's like everybody is wearing different clothes, and the cars look different and stuff. And here's like,
totally. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, we always talk about common threads in our readers, which always happens. There's always something.
Yes.
Sometimes it's more obvious than others, but this, and we're bringing Benjamin back on here.
Yes.
This idea of the now, who you are now, was so much a part of Benjamin's, at 50. And then back in the late 80s, and the back and forth from poem to poem.
Yes, and even to childhood. We love that when we get to have these sort of serendipitous connections, between between our two features, and between both of you, just such beautiful connections, such personal vulnerability, making me like reach for my tissues over here, but in the best way, like getting to hear these incredibly vulnerable and beautiful stories that we can all connect to. One more round of applause for Benjamin S. Grossberg and Amanda Parrish Morgan. Thank you so much, both of you, for your readings this evening. We just love them. And when you have a chance to check in on Facebook and YouTube, you gotta just see all the love coming in for your reading and everything that the people were sharing and are sharing now. But Chris, kick us off with our famous first question. And audience, get your questions in the chat.
Yeah, please put your questions in the chat, as we say. So okay, we'll start with Benjamin too. A very simple question, which is not the same as easy, but simple. How has being a writer changed, shaped, affected your life?
Well, it's not an easy question. In sort of the most, everything gets processed and
Right.
visited and revisited. What you were talking about, that I was doing across poems and Amanda was doing in one text, the sort of dance back and forth. I think we all do this. I think it's a human thing to do. The difference is, that writers do it professionally, and so we do it often, and even when we don't want to, it's a sort of go-to cogitation. So I think that there's constant reassessment is built in, but also being a writer allows you let's say that all humans constantly reassess. I mean, perhaps writers do it more. That was, but as a writer, not only do you constantly do it, but you have the pleasure of every now and again finishing it, making
Yes.
a out of it, and so and that lets you. It lets you leave it somewhere for a little bit. I mean,
detach a little bit, but in like the most healing and healthy way, and look
Right.
at it.
I mean, you always have to come back,
Yeah.
I mean, but at least there's the illusion of
Mhm.
kind of stillness. Yeah. There's
It's great.
the work of craft is also a psychological work of finishing.
Yes. 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 I love that, Benjamin. Just yes.
Mhm. So yeah, so Amanda, same question.
I again was very grateful that Benjamin went first. But while you were talking, I was thinking about a recent conversation my husband and I had. He teaches physics and computer programming, so we have really different ways of thinking about
Yeah.
everything. I mean, like the way we both love reading and to be home thinking about new ideas, but it's just in really different ways. And he'll often say like, "Wow, how do you remember that about my childhood?" I didn't know him then, but I've wondered a lot if even well before I would have thought to think of myself as a writer, I I've always just loved noticing things and then making them into stories. Not even writing, before I guess what I'm really saying before I can even write things down. Like I kind of have a memory of even as a kid being in a new situation and noticing a few details that I could use to explain the situation to myself. Just as like sort of a calming mechanism for being in a new situation. And I do think that might be why, not to say I have an exceptionally good memory, but why I remember certain kinds of things that
Yes.
some other adults might not. And I forget where my keys are pretty much every morning, so it's not all that useful in a non-writing sense. But I have just since we had this conversation a few weeks ago, I've been thinking a lot about um, how the way that I have a habit of like making a story, even as an event is unfolding, helps me to sort of just make sense of the way I exist in the world aside from as a writer. And then the flip side of that, I think, is when I'm writing, it sometimes can be hard a little bit to know when am I far enough away from this
Yeah.
experience I've been narrating to actually narrate it for anyone other than myself.
Yes.
That
Right.
summer or fall of living in West Virginia, I've tried to write about a lot, and I've never really felt like, other than this brief reference to it in the context of a relationship, it's always felt wrong the way and it's always felt like I don't have enough distance from that time yet. And now it's 20 years ago. So I don't know if it's like a linear distance I need, but
Right.
yeah.
Oh, no, it's an emotional kind
Yeah.
of a thing. And do you feel like you use any kind of like a persona or like a voice that's not it's not you. It's like the person next to you almost.
Yeah.
It can take on this emotionally charged. Same with Benjamin. I mean, this is some very emotionally charged stuff. Writing about your mom, writing about the AIDS epidemic and everything. It's like you write about it. It's red hot. It's like how do you pick that up?
Right. Right.
It
I feel
reminds
like
me of something, a metaphor that Adrienne Rich used. She described form as asbestos gloves.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and I don't, and in the thing Amanda read, I mean, there's no form in terms of rhyme and meter, but in those things, clearly there's a sense of form, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
like I
Yes.
got that sense of Amanda. It felt very shapely, even if it wasn't rhymed and metered. Obviously, it was prose, but so I mean, there is a way in which craft again helps with that, perhaps.
Benjamin, absolutely. Yes. And Amanda, I just want to speak to what you said a moment ago, but before you share your answer, we were talking about capturing things and how writing gives you this opportunity. Like you kind of capture this memory from childhood, and then you have this time in West Virginia. You're like, I know I'm going to write about that. And you're kind of just storing it all up. And it's gonna happen at some point. And I can totally relate to that. And I think that's awesome. But yeah, and Benjamin, I just love what you just said about form and craft being able to separate us a bit. But what do you think about that, Amanda?
I love that too. I actually wrote down that asbestos gloves.
So good.
I was just talking to my students about form and content. Sometimes I get a little sick of doing the strict. I teach college writing and we do a lot of rhetorical analysis. And I was like, let's try to think of this aside from, the traditional read an op-ed and look at the rhetorical devices. So I was trying to use different terms to get at the same idea. Anyway, I also think that in poetry, I'm just so in awe of poets because I feel like I'm able to hide behind things like, oh, I'm going to talk about these tapestries now. I mean, not that you wouldn't write about tapestries in a poem, but I
Definitely.
often notice a habit I have of like, I'll start researching something that does mean something to me, these tapestries, for example, or like when I had this year-long obsession, and I really mean obsession with Carl Jung, like I have his red book on my bookshelf. It was really a little odd. Like it didn't really amount to anything at the end of it, but those were all ways of I could give some distance between what I was trying to write about, because then I could filter it through like a more academic kind of lens and say like the history of these tapestries is, I read the article in the New Yorker, and it's sometimes I have to sort of be aware of that tendency, or just I guess like think about the
Mm,
balance in when that's a useful way to structure a personal experience so that I can maybe sort of link it, or I always think of
right.
it as hanging it on it, like if it's a rack or something. But when does it become something that's too removed from the heat that, that I always feel with
Right.
poetry, and particularly with the poems Benjamin was reading, that, there wasn't distance from that heat. So,
Right.
and it's a different form in the poetry nonfiction sense, but I still think that nonfiction should be there too, so just not really an answer, but a conundrum, I guess.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're going with it, what you're doing, and how you feel about it. Sometimes, like you're digging right into that intensity and that heat, as we heard in some of these very very powerful, intense and painful poems, and like in nonfiction too. Sometimes we're going straight to the heart of it, and I think it's interesting to kind of judge that distance and where we're going to put that, and how we're going to decide about that or change that in the future. But I think that that's such an interesting question. That's a very cool one. We have some questions in the chat.
Dude,
Chris, should we bring Frederick Feely? I apologize for the mispronunciation. A beautiful question here. Okay. The lovely wistfulness and inherent spirituality within both of your works are very much present. What a beautiful sentence just right there. There's also a sense of forgiveness for the world around you, but more profoundly for yourselves from where you've been to where you are now. Also beautifully stated. Do you find that you can set some of your burdens down for good, that you understand your reality a little bit better in a way that brings relief? Wow. Awesome questions. Benjamin and then Amanda.
Um, uh, it is a good question. It's a hard one. I'm not. The same essay by Adrienne Rich. I think, yeah. When We Dead Awaken, she says that she has many ideas that never would have been acceptable to her if they hadn't come to her in poems first. And I'm
Ooh,
sure that's true with essays or any form of
yeah.
writing. And so when Frederick Feely, who's a novelist, actually, so I'm not surprised his questions are so beautiful. When he asked, "Do you find that you can set some of your burdens down for good?" I I think the answer is yes, because of the second one, right? And not
Mm,
that you can set them, that your understanding can expand. And like in the first poem I read, it talks about that moment with my mother and father, a Metsia, real bargain. And it wasn't until after I wrote that poem, I mean, I sort of knew this, but after I wrote that poem, I realized, my God, my parents loved each other. And I suppose I knew that, but I didn't know it in the way I knew it until,
right.
like I recalled the scene that I never really thought about because it just happened in my childhood, a million permutations of it. Um, and that uh, that lays down a burden to look
Yes.
back and say, yes, these, that of all the other stuff, and there was a lot of it, but there was love too. Yeah.
Beautiful, Benjamin. Absolutely.
I think about forgiveness a lot, in all different kinds of writing. I keep trying and not finishing novels. So in both of them, without realizing it, sort of, ended up centering on this idea of forgiveness, especially of forgiving ourselves, because I think that in some ways can be more difficult. A metaphor I've thought a lot about is like the idea of a half-life and a radioactive isotope, and that as time goes on, the traces of it become fainter. And I also like that metaphor because it makes me think about something that can be dangerous, in the immediate aftermath of dangerous, maybe for the person experiencing the feelings of shame or anger, or that there is something, not quite harmless in that kind of the energy that comes from, especially I think shame, which is another thing I'm really interested in writing about. But and maybe just as a broader answer, that I don't know, maybe this goes back to something Benjamin said before about like when I can't remember the exact words you used, Benjamin, but you were talking about that sense of when you are able to feel that you've gotten it right on the page for that brief moment. And I don't know exactly how you phrased it, but I know that feeling that you're talking about. And so I guess I would say maybe temporarily, but then the phrase in Frederick's question about if you can put down your burdens for good, I guess I wouldn't say for good, but definitely at least temporarily, or in a way that repositions them or makes them more approachable or something, or transforms them a bit.
Maybe they're not as heavy.
Yeah.
Or
They've decayed a bit.
Yes.
Big, it's like when you pick up a box, it's not even necessarily that heavy. It's just too big. You can't get your arms around it.
Absolutely. I think both of you gave such beautiful answers there. And what a wonderful question to think about. I think for all of us writers, there's a degree to which, we're finding a level of personal healing in our writing, especially when our writing is personal. And I can really relate to to both of your answers. Thank you so much. We've got a question from Brenda Sorrells. So thanks, Brenda. So great to see you. Also, shout out to Phil and Chance. We see you out there. So great to see you. But anyways, Brenda's question is, does either of you decide to go back and forth in time and place consciously? Or is it more organic and just kind of happens as you're writing? Benjamin and then Amanda.
Oh, gosh. I'm never able to anticipate any of my leaps or there's just no duplicating surprise on the page.
Yes.
I need to be as surprised as the reader, and part of it, I don't know. This is kind of a question for Amanda, but if I saw you shaking your head, so maybe you have. But for me, Amanda, like I can get bored with my own writing really quickly, and if that surprise doesn't have like the poor reader may be reading one poem, but geez, I've read just thousands of them, and they just get old. That if there's not that surprise, I won't even finish things.
Yeah. Right. I definitely, this is a bit of a cliche in the essay writing world to, talk about how the word essay means to try, but not consciously, but I just don't have a better way of my brain working through a piece of writing than to start without knowing where I'm going. I mean, even to the point where, I do a lot of freelance writing too. And if I'm pitching a piece that needs to have a more clear argument, that's always very hard for me. I mean, I'll even joke, like, I'll pitch an editor and get a response like, this all sounds okay, but like, what's the argument here? And I always have to go back on a second round, with the editor, even if the piece ultimately gets accepted, because I will think I have clearly articulated. Well, I asked like 16 questions that I'm going to think about in the essay. Isn't that an argument? No, I mean, so I just think that's, even as a student, I always, I loved writing and writing classes, but when the thing that I would consistently get frustrated with, and I'm sure my professors would too, was that I would build up all these what ifs and what ifs and what ifs, and sometimes not, or often probably not really ever resolve them.
Right.
Okay. And I don't know if this is exactly on Brenda's point, but just even my habits as a reader, I know not all writers are like this, but I will be reading like 5 books at the same time. And I don't always finish a book if I don't like it. Life is too short. I abandon a book if I don't like it. Some of my, other friends who like to read a lot will be like, well, how can you be listening to one book and like reading one in the morning and one at night? I'm not sure that it's the most efficient way to do things, but it just kind of my brain's hectic habits, I guess.
I just kind of love that, because what I'm always kind of advising, at least from my practice, like from the way I write poetry, is just, you have this very authentic, moment when you feel that inspiration and you really feel driven to write, or, you kind of take that, captured image and you're like, now is the time. And just going with that flow, like, whether you're moving back and forth in time, following that rather than like kind of squeezing it, bruising it, pushing it into a form initially, that is such a precious time for getting out like what you really want to say. You can return to it a million times, but you can't necessarily get back these like precious moments of flow where, you're really laying it down. And I think that's just such a great question, because of course, in writing, there's like the brainstorming stage, which might be that where you're just letting yourself go wild, free writing, right? And then you do the organization afterwards. I was an ESL teacher for 10 years, teaching college essays as well. And I'm thinking of like teaching the forms and how little creative room you have in that. And I just love what you said, Amanda, like, as I'm writing essays, more questions come up. And, if you have unlimited time and it's sort of like an unlimited form, like you're gonna spin around to that answer and kind of grow in this really interesting organic way. But, that's not always what we like have to write right now. That's so great. I loved both of your answers. Really wonderful. Speaking of you both being teachers, I would really love to hear about how the teaching life inspires, affects, shapes your writing life. And Chris and I both teachers, workshop leaders, as well. We would love to hear that from you, Benjamin, and then Amanda.
Maybe Amanda should take this one first.
Amanda, go for it.
Maybe that's okay.
That's fair.
Sure.
So I taught high school English in a public school in Fairfield and then in Westport for about 10 years. When I was teaching public school, I could not write during the school year at all. Like, I mean, I couldn't even write in my journal usually, or an email.
Tired. Done.
And I also felt like the role that I had as that just a high school teacher has in a school community is a little bit different in that, I also coached the cross country and track team, and I was in the building from like 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. most days. So that was like any creative energy. I didn't have a family of my own at home. So, I didn't feel a rush other than to, come home and have a life of my own, which I didn't really have in those years. But I felt like a lot of the creative energy that writing needs was used up for me by the way I cared about my job. Now I have just a really different situation. I only teach 2 classes at Fairfield U, and then I'm teaching 2 classes at the Westport Writers Workshop. But there's just such a different dynamic of when you're teaching adults, for example, at the Writers Workshop, who all want to, they picked to be there. They're paying their own money to be there. It's just not a grading load in the same way. There's not the like call the guidance counselor, someone's in crisis situation happening. And even though that does happen a little bit with my college students, I think I'm also just, because I'm only on campus 2 days a week, it doesn't feel like the same all-consuming erasure of every other creative outlet.
I really, really do hear you. Teaching can really do that to you. It's so good that you have a schedule that allows you to sort of breathe and have time for writing and gives you kind of access to these students in like a workshop environment. That's wonderful.
So I would say I've really tried to be strict with myself too, that now that I'm just older and more experienced, both as a writer and as a teacher, to be very minimal on how much time I spend grading, and to just really rethink what a class should look like, not just for my students, but for me. And when I was a young high school English teacher, it was like the more hours of work I can do, the better. And which is a tough, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but I honestly do think I was probably a better teacher in those years when I worked 12 hours a day every day, but it was not sustainable and I was not writing anything at all. So, you know what, I did give up some role that mattered to me in an exchange, like made room for writing, I guess.
Yeah. I get it.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, I sort of want to thank Amanda for the honesty of that answer, because part of the difficulty answering this question is I think that there's an answer one wants to give,
Yep.
and then a more complicated true answer, which is that, you know, there is something wonderful about working with new writers, and it is always useful, I think, to talk and to think about writing with a group of people, and to have them examine the ideas you give them through fresh eyes, which makes you have to re-examine them. So there are generative aspects of the process,
Totally.
but you get a little older and your energy is limited, and you realize that your time is limited too.
Yep.
And really, you know, good fences make good neighbors. You know,
Yep.
that everyone needs a few boundaries there.
Totally. After 10 years of teaching and adjuncting all over the place and having very little money or time for anything else, I feel like I'm going to do more writing. I'm making a career transition into data science. I love teaching, but it is really hard and draining. As inspiring as it is, it's hard to do anything else. You know, when you're doing it. So you know, and I look forward to one day, you know, taking on a class in the evening when I don't have to rely on adjuncting as my sole source of money. But on to a more fun question before we wrap up. But thank you so much for your honesty and all that realness. We can all relate, those of us who write and teach. But I think this, Chris, should be our Pearl of Wisdom question. We do a famous last double question where we ask you for a pearl of wisdom for writers and a book recommendation. But since Frederick Feely is out here just slinging incredible questions, we would love to have that question. So I'm going to read off Frederick Feely's question, this and a book recommendation along with that. So Frederick Feely asks, to both of you again, writing for me is a high art. I don't care what the medium is. In an age of Netflix and chill and binge culture, how do we convince a newer generation to sit down, get quiet, and write? Plus a book recommendation. Whoever wants to jump in first.
How we get them to read as well. So that'll be
right. Read and write.
I'm going to take a moment and walk to my bookshelf, because I know the book I want and I just want to get it to
get it.
So I will be very quickly back.
No, Chris does this all the time. I bet you he has a book that you're going to recommend too. Chris has a incredible library. I'm excited.
This book, Carol Phillips, A Distant Shore. I just want to say, every now and again, I will read a book, a novelist who makes me realize how piddling my own efforts are.
Oh, stop!
And this is a book about a child soldier who comes to England and who forms a friendship with a troubled woman, and there's some things, troubling things happen because of racism to the African child soldier. The prose is so rich and the human stakes are so high, and the glimpses of the child soldier history are so vivid. This book kicks ass.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, what a recommendation, everybody. Thank you so much, Benjamin.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just was going to say my book recommendation. I hope this isn't cheating a bit, but I discovered Maggie O'Farrell's writing when Hamnet came out a few years ago, and everyone was talking about Hamnet, and I loved it. I thought it was beautiful, and I was giving copies of it to everyone, and half the people were like, "This book is devastating. Why did you give this to me?" But then I started reading all of her other writing. So because I think a lot of people already know about Hamnet, I'll say Maggie O'Farrell's essay collection, which is called I Am, I Am, I Am. I actually have it on my bookshelf. I'll grab it as well. Is the writing is as beautiful and strange and unexpected as in Hamnet. And it has, if you've read Hamnet, the same sort of like ambiguous, I don't want to say it's not all the way to supernatural the way I interpreted it, but it's also not just like straightforward spirituality. And there's a really sort of like complex, unresolved tension between the physical world we all live in and the ways that that world can feel unexplained or even mystical sometimes, that comes across in these essays too. And I thought it was just, they were beautiful, and they're sort of united under this arc of they're all essays grappling with mortality in some way. The sort of, I'm sure, marketing tagline that somewhere in the book is like, they're all about time she almost died, but that sounds way too glib and sort of silly, because some of them are very opaquely about any sort of brush with death. And, you know, one is about actually being threatened with sexual assault and almost dying in a very literal way. So it feels very cheesy to say they're about time she almost died, but they are all about grappling with mortality, and I think in really beautiful language.
That's awesome. 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 Thank you for these powerful recommendations. And now to Frederick's question. What do you think? What do you think about this? What would you say?
How do we convince this newer generation to sit down, get quiet, and write? Remember what did it used to be? What was that whole thing? Tune out, tune in, get high. Whatever it used to be back in the
But right.
Get quiet and write.
Or maybe like you gotta like move around and get noisy and write, you know? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know if this is a controversial answer, but I
love controversy.
Well, I actually love listening to books. As my essay kind of referenced, I like to run a lot, and I listen to like probably a couple books a week running.
Yeah.
And I used to think like I wouldn't say I read a book. I'd say, well, I read this book. Well, actually, I just listened to it. And then I just sort of felt like that's so silly, you know. I did read it. If I were going to, you know, write a critical essay about it, I would go buy the book and find the quotations I needed. But especially, I think, depending on your goals for engaging with, like, let's say, a piece of literary fiction, or actually right now I'm listening to Patti Smith's M Train, which is like the strangest, most beautiful poetic book. And it's perfect to listen to it instead of, I mean, I would love to read it as well. But so I actually think part of it could be like thinking differently about how we define what the high art of writing, what form, you know, to think about form, you know, medium not mattering. So I know not all writers feel the same way about that. But then I guess the second part of my answer is just, I feel deeply worried about this too. Like in the same way I worry about the future of our democracy. Like, you know, I mean, I don't mean to go all the way to the apocalypse, but it really does actually feel like these two things are connected. And it does feel like a moment of crisis to me that I don't have a better answer to than, for me, when my attention span is waning, I listen to a book. But
I think that's really valid. You know, you find a different method, a different mode. You make it work. You're listening, you're engaging. I think it's good that we have different modalities for taking things in, like coming to an online reading or an in-person event or something like that. What do you think, Benjamin?
Well, I share the concern you guys are articulating, and you know, we live in this weird moment, you know, like where we can sort of see culture change in real time and our tools evolve in real time. And my hope is that Netflix and chill binge culture, really just the new media's reshaping of our attention, you know, the shape of it, the span of it, the texture of it, will result in kinds of writing that I, as somebody born before, you know, home computers were a thing, that I will not immediately cotton to, but
Mhm.
will have its own heft and validity in ways that are hard to, that I will have to learn and stretch myself to appreciate. Like sometimes a kind thing some people will say about my poems is that they are cinematic. Um,
Mm.
and whether that's true or not, if it is true, it's true because I was raised watching movies, right?
That's
And so someone might say, perhaps 20 years from now, your poem has a kind of like Twitter coolness, and that may be a thing that I am not well situated to appreciate, but that other generations will. That it might be the apocalypse. I'm really not prepared to say it's not the apocalypse, but it's also possible that it's just evolving standards of human cognition, and
yeah.
will be beautiful in their own way.
I have to believe, I really do have faith that creative writing is going nowhere, that I feel like there's still just a general sense of glee when someone goes into like a stationery store and it's just like walls of journals, and even if those stores are online stores, it's like I get to write, I get to feel the words coming out of me, and even though that ultimately may go into a laptop, into a TikTok, into a book, into a poem, into some kind of performance piece. I think these new forms of media are going to be continue to be really exciting, and I think nothing can really stop that inspiration, that expression, or our desire for it. But I think it definitely can be scary, when the forms and formats kind of change so much, and when scary, crazy, creepy things are happening in our government that may aim to like limit our freedoms in some way. But
And
I'm really hoping that our new generations are keeping it going.
Katie, when you say that, it occurs to me that those new, forms that seem maybe weird, those people will get old too, and there will be newer
That's
forms
right.
that will make them worry about their own, that our this this may be just the way generations
Oh
are in
yes.
conversation with each other.
So
Oh,
true. So I don't think anything's going to stop the writing.
yeah. Our parents would be, it's like it's rock music. It's like, oh my God,
Right.
whatever it is.
So
No,
true.
that's right, and they couldn't have a, like the operatic grandness of a Pink Floyd album
Yeah.
would not have been conceivable, and who knows what operatic grandness today's new media culture will produce that right now are, to me
Concerning to
sometimes
us.
distasteful,
That we're not so sure about yet. I get it. I get it. I get it. I love it. But I have total faith in just that human urge to create. I think it's always going to be there in some incredible forms and in ways that sort of scare and then surprise us.
Yes.
Um,
But listen, before we go, because we have to end, I think Amanda, do you have a question for Benjamin?
oh yeah,
It was sort of just an open-ended, like all of my questions and answers that aren't really questions or answers.
I love it.
I just was reading Claire Dieter's most recent book, not the one that's coming out next week, but she wrote a book a couple years ago called Love and Trouble, and it's sort of like a memoir. It is a memoir, but it's a memoir that's sort of about her sexuality, but it's also thinking. So it's structured with excerpts from her journal entries from childhood through adulthood, and then sort of longer essays that jump somehow from that excerpt. But she returns a lot to the idea of the 70s as this era that felt both profoundly free and profoundly dangerous sexually. And I was born in 1982, so it's, to me, the 70s has always been, in the past, before I was born, obviously. But she especially is writing about like this. She's really interested in thinking about how art of people like Roman Polanski or something, like how do we handle the art of someone who has done something terrible, like raped a child, and then his art is celebrated, like how do we reconcile that? And she keeps returning to this idea of the 1970s as this sort of like last era of one thing and then first era of something else that created this uniquely, in her mind at least, she's specifically talking about for young girls or young women, I guess. She was probably a teenager through most of the 70s. Just that sort of like really charged, almost like dynamite ready to explode culture of sexuality in the 70s. So just hearing when you were in your poem, it made me think about, in such a different context, how I had just been thinking about similarly about the culture of that decade.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have a lot more to say about that than I do. My own knowledge of it is so narrow. And though I was born in the 70s, I was too young to really experience any of it. But it has always struck me as hard to reconcile the sexual explosion you talk about, especially among gay people.
Yeah.
And how free and how sophisticated that must have felt. And then how the 1980s just knocks it. No, you thought you were sophisticated. You didn't know shit, right? Like this is a different kind of experience.
Right.
And so just on one hand, the 70s seem so naive because, and then on the other hand, they don't. Just like you're saying, there's this discovery of freedom and expression, which so it's. Yeah, like I said, it's sort of before my time too, though I'm older. But I'd love to read some of the books you're talking about.
Yes.
I'd love to be educated more about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that the ending of that in that one poem where you said it was just so exciting and yet so naive and kind of, you didn't know that this danger was waiting for you. That was so palpable and powerful. And Amanda, that's so cool to hear you speak about that as well. Like, just, I wasn't alive then either, but hearing about the history and just imagining how that must have felt, you evoked that so powerfully, Benjamin. But both of you, what incredible, powerful readings, and thank you so much for spending the evening with us. It was just the best to get to talk to you in this Q&A. One more round of applause for Benjamin and Amanda. All right, everybody go out and purchase their books wherever books are sold and find them on social media. Stay connected just to these incredible authors. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Amanda.
It was really nice to meet you, Benjamin, too.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our audience. We will see you on Friday at Eco Evolution in South Norwalk. Woo! Yes, see you then. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.